Welcome back to the J&J Show. I'm Jake.
And I'm Jason.
And today we're going to do our usual 5 games, but today they're actually the conference championship games, so these are probably the biggest games of the year. And on top of that, we're going to go back and review Heisman and playoffs because this is the last week until those things are announced, I think. And this week we don't have a guest. We'll have another guest next week, but this week it's just me and Jason. And so we're going to go ahead and kick it off with the games, and we're going to start with number 1 Alabama at 4 Georgia. What do you think about this one, Jason?
This is going to be a really big game. Georgia hasn't beaten – they've played each other like 3 times. In the SEC Championship back in 2012, Alabama won because of a tip pass that was caught and time ran out. In 2015, Alabama beat Georgia in a blowout game in Athens. And last year, obviously, the comeback that started this whole Tua train that's been just running through ever since. Georgia's defense had a great defense last year, and the defense this year I don't think is as good as last year's. I think Alabama beats them by even more points than what they beat them by last year. I think Alabama stops Elijah Holyfield and DeAndre Swift early. They'll get some good runs, but it won't be much. I think Alabama just dominates Georgia in the entire game.
I think the key to beating Alabama this year is all offense. I don't think defense matters at all. That's why I think Oklahoma has the best shot out of any team to beat Alabama, but we'll talk about that later. And Georgia has a pretty good offense. You know, Auburn couldn't keep up. A&M couldn't keep up, but A&M was their closest game. I just like to keep saying that. And they have a good offense. So that means something, I think. And Georgia has a pretty good offense, too. So I actually think that this will be Alabama's best game yet. I think Alabama will win, but if Georgia won, my mind wouldn't be blown. I think Georgia can do it, but I'm going to say Alabama for this one too. So next, we have a few cupcake games. 2 Clemson at Pittsburgh.
I've been saying this for a while. Clemson has not played anybody. Even in this championship game, they're still not playing anybody. Clemson, Trevor Lawrence dominates. Justin Ross dominates. T. Higgins dominates. The Clemson offense just dominates. But their defense gave up 35 points to South Carolina. But you could say those are just cupcake yards or cupcake points. Their starting quarterback for South Carolina, Jake Bentley, threw for over 500 yards. Now, I don't know how long he played in that football game, but that's still a lot of yards and a lot of touchdowns against what's supposed to be a very good Clemson defense. But anyways, that doesn't really matter. Clemson's still going to dominate this football game, and they're going to go in and clinch their spot in the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree. And I think even if Alabama or Clemson lose this week, they'd still make it to the playoffs. But that's besides the point. I think Clemson is going to win. I think most people think that, except for hardcore Pittsburgh fans. Clemson is supposed to have a good defense. You know, they have a good offense with Trevor Lawrence and Justin Ross and all those guys. I think this will be a blowout, and that's pretty much all I have to say about this one. So we're going to move on to 21 Northwestern at number 6 Ohio State. This one looks just like Clemson-Pittsburgh.
Ohio State, they looked great last week against Michigan because, you know, Michigan statistically had the number 1 defense in the country going into last week, and then they played Ohio State at Ohio State and gave up 62 points. I don't think it really should matter whether you're on home or whether you're on the road, how good your defense is. If you got the number 1 defense in the country, you should not be giving up 62 points. But that's besides the point. Ohio State, their offense looks great. Dwayne Haskins and J.K. Dobbins. I can't remember his first name right now, but Campbell, their entire offense just looks great. Ohio State is playing Northwestern. I don't know how Northwestern gets into the Big Ten championship game. I don't know what happened to.
They're ranked.
Yeah, but I don't know what happened to Wisconsin this year. They have one job, and that is to win the other division and play either Ohio State or Michigan in the Big Ten championship every year. And they didn't do that this year. So Ohio State wins handily against Northwestern, and you know it just happens. I
agree. I think the Ohio State team that played last week against Michigan also has a chance at beating Alabama. If they can keep that up, I think that they could also beat Alabama. Their offense looked good against the number 1 defense. And, like I said, I think that's the key. Northwestern is ranked 21st. It is at Ohio State. None of those things matter. I think Ohio State's going to win this with a blowout. So, we're going to go ahead and move on again to Memphis at 8 UCF, one of my favorite teams. What do you think about this one, Jason?
Memphis, when UCF and Memphis played earlier in the season, Memphis was up 30-14 at the half. UCF did come back and win that football game 31-30. Memphis has a chance at redemption. UCF's quarterback, Mackenzie Milton, is out for the rest of the season. And I don't know, his career, it depends on how his surgery goes. But I think Memphis upsets I can't even say it. Memphis is going to upset UCF. I think their quarterback getting injured just takes a huge toll, and I think Memphis just gets the job done against UCF.
All right, before I call this one, I'm going to have to just defend UCF and say that they are the real national champs. But either way, their quarterback was knocked out in the first quarter of last week, I think, and they still won handily. So I think there was a scare with this game last week. I don't think it matters. UCF wins again, and they continue their streak of the most games won in a row without losing. And next year, I really want to see this team in the playoffs, especially if they have a healthy quarterback. I think they deserved it this year. But things happen, I don't always agree with how the playoffs are made in college football, but hopefully next year we can see them in it or at least have a shot. But we're going to move on to our last game, 14 Texas at 5 Oklahoma. I think this will be the best game of this week, besides maybe Alabama's game. What do you think about this one? It's at Oklahoma.
This game, the Red River Rivalry, Part 2, this game is going to have a lot more meaning than the first one has, just because Texas has a chance to keep the Big 12 out of the playoffs if they somehow find a way to win this football game. Keep in mind, Oklahoma is getting like 50-something points. Each week they put up 59 on West Virginia, 55 on Kansas, 48 on Oklahoma State, 51 on Texas Tech. They've just been scoring, but they don't play no defense. Texas plays at least a little bit of defense. Oklahoma gave up 40 to Kansas. Kansas. Texas, while it was a close football game, they only let Kansas score 17 points. So if Texas plays really good on defense, Oklahoma's defense isn't going to do anything. I got Texas going in there, upsetting Oklahoma again. Yeah, again. Texas wins a close one, 52-45. Another close one.
So I'm from Texas. I like Texas, and shout out to my mom. She's a big Texas fan, and she hopes Oklahoma never wins anything in their life. But I don't mind them. I'm an A&M fan, so I don't mind Oklahoma, and I really like them this year because I want them to beat Alabama, and I think that they can do it over anyone. This will be a shootout again. I think Oklahoma's going to win this one, but if Texas does win, and they know that they were the only reason Oklahoma didn't go to the playoffs, I know Texas fans around the nation will rejoice and be happy that Oklahoma didn't make it just because of them, even if they didn't get their shot this year. But I think Oklahoma's going to win. It could be close. Texas could win, but I'm going to call it with Oklahoma, and they move on to the playoffs. And also, I want to go back and say that Ohio State, I don't think they can make it to the playoffs if Oklahoma wins. If Oklahoma wins,
so are we doing playoffs?
Yeah, let's go into playoffs. I'm just gonna let you start off with your predictions, Jason.
All right, so I got Alabama 1, Clemson 2, Notre Dame. Notre Dame should be forced to join a conference so they can play in conference championship games. They're an independent team, but they should be forced to join a conference so we don't have this problem every year, just in case Notre Dame goes undefeated. Because really their only good win this year is against number 7 Michigan, and I'm looking at the rest of them. They also have another 31-20 win over Northwestern and a 36-3 win over Syracuse. I think that Notre Dame has locked in their spot at number 3. That spot's not going to change. It's not going to move no matter what happens on Saturday. Notre Dame is stuck at number 3. And number 4, that's the big one, Oklahoma or Ohio State. I think as long as Oklahoma just wins the football game, it doesn't even matter how they do it. As long as they just win the football game, I think Oklahoma gets the number 4 spot. Even like you could say Ohio State can go into this weekend and blow out Northwestern. Let's say they do. It doesn't matter because they lost 49-20 to Purdue. I feel like that's an unforgivable loss because same situation last year. They got blown out by Iowa by like 31 points, which is why they didn't get in last year because that's an unforgivable loss. So even if Ohio State wins and Oklahoma wins, it's just too unforgivable of a loss to put Ohio State in. That's what I believe. So top 4, Alabama, Clemson, Notre Dame, Oklahoma.
So I agree with number 1 Alabama. I agree with 2 Clemson, and 3 and 4 are the hard ones. Those are the hard ones. I think Notre Dame has secured their spot. I do think that they should join a conference, and I think that they would be put in Ohio State's conference, right?
The Big Ten there
in
South Bend, Indiana. So yeah, there's a good chance they'd be put in.
Yeah, and so I don't think they would even be considered for the playoffs because they'd have to play Ohio State. Well, they did beat Michigan, so maybe they would be in that race still, but then they'd be playing Ohio State this week, and that'd be a good game to watch. But that's besides the point. I think Oklahoma wins, and they're put at 3 because they beat a team this week, and Notre Dame's dropped down to 4. And I think because Notre Dame's dropped down to 4 because they didn't play a game this week. And I don't think Ohio State can make it in, like Jason said, no matter if they beat Northwestern 60-0. As long as Oklahoma beats Texas, I think they're in because the team that they beat would have been more credible, and they're already ranked higher. So I think that Oklahoma makes it as long as they win and Ohio State's left out, unless someone loses in the top 4. But with that, we're going to move on to Heisman. And this is our last topic. But I think Kyler Murray has upped his chances to win Heisman over the past few weeks. But I'm going to let you say what you think, Jason.
All right. So everyone at the beginning of the season said, Tua is overrated. It was only one half against one of the best defenses in the country last year in that Georgia football game. And he's basically just shredded everyone. I said a couple weeks ago that he had his Heisman defining moment, like when he took off for his 40-yard touchdown run against LSU to make it 22-0. I think that was a great Heisman defining moment. Last week against Auburn, he had 6 total touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 5 passing, 1 rushing, over 300 passing yards. I think he goes off again against Georgia this week. I think Tua looks better than Kyler because Tua is playing actual defenses and Kyler Murray is playing West Virginia, who doesn't play any defense. Kansas, they don't play no defense. Texas Tech doesn't play no defense. Alabama's quarterback has to play actual defenses, and he's still putting up big numbers. So I think Tua goes off against Georgia and secures his Heisman this weekend. So, yeah, it's not close as long as he just goes off again for one more time.
I think that Tua has closed the gap. I don't think Alabama has played many good defenses besides LSU. A&M has an okay defense. Auburn's defense is whatever. Tennessee is whatever.
Mississippi State has a pretty good defense year to year.
Yeah, but no super defenses besides LSU. And, 72 points last week didn't look like a great defense.
Hey, 72 points. 74 points. Keep in mind, that was a 7 overtime game, and LSU got the refs kind of messed them over 3 times, at least 3 times. Kellen Mond's knee was down, but in overtime, the tight end did catch that football and fumble it. The pass interference call was, like all those calls against LSU that just went in Texas A&M way. I think LSU got messed up in that game, and they shouldn't have even gone to that many overtimes. LSU should have won that game in regulation.
I don't know if the refs were biased. They may have just been bad because there were a few calls early game, not as defying as the ones that went in our favor, but calls that were just bad against us, like first down placements and things like that. So I don't think they were biased. I think that they were just not good refs, and I don't think a lot of college football refs are that good. But still, LSU, even in regular time, I still think we put up 30-something against them, which is not good for a superstar defense like they're supposed to have. So I think Kyler Murray has looked just as good as Tua, in my opinion.
But he doesn't play nobody.
I don't think Alabama's played many people either. I mean, they've played Texas, and they did lose, but he looked good. He still scored 50 or 60 points against them. He played West Virginia. Alabama's only credible team is LSU, really. Auburn was not credible. Tennessee, no. Mississippi State, not really. I just don't think Alabama plays – I think Alabama might play a little better defenses, but not so much better that you can really like give them the credit. Like they play good defenses and Oklahoma doesn't. I don't think either of them play really good defenses.
Okay, but the teams that Alabama plays though play at least a little bit of defense. It looks like the teams that Oklahoma has to play, their defense, their cornerbacks and safeties are just letting them run up and down the field, and they're not just going to touch them at all. But at least the teams that Alabama play, they at least jam them at the line before they get outran. I mean, it's just like the Oklahoma didn't play nobody on defense.
I understand where you're coming from, and we could go back and forth with this all day, but I think actually here's what I'm going to say: this week decides who gets Heisman. If Georgia wins, I think, and Kyler, if Oklahoma wins and Alabama loses, I think Kyler's going to get it. If they both win, I think Tua's lead is enough to give him Heisman. And if Oklahoma loses and Alabama wins, of course Tua's going to get it. But this week, even if Alabama wins and Tua looks bad, I don't think that would happen, though. Then I think Kyler could get it. I think this week decides Heisman. So that's all I'm going to say about that. This is the most important week for Heisman contenders. And by that I mean just really Kyler and Tua. I don't think anyone else is even in the conversation right now. So I think we'll just see on Saturday what happens. Are all the games on Saturday?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I think one of them's on Friday, I want to say.
We'll see by the end of this weekend. I think we'll look at the stats and we'll know who Heisman's going to be. But right now I do think Tua has the lead. So we're going to wrap it up with that. This has been the J&J Show. Once again, I've been Jake.
And I'm Jason.
And we hope to see you next week. Thank you for tuning in.